Hello and welcome into Listen Up. I'm Joey Trincali here with Alex Como. Let's get right to the top 5 topics, special edition, only 4. You'll see why in just a bit. But we're going to start with college basketball. It took center stage this weekend with the opening rounds of the NCAA tournament, but there's some madness taking place here in Blacksburg and involves Robert Brown. He's going to transfer from the program. What does this mean for the team next year, Alex?
I've seen a lot of people who are openly ecstatic about losing Robert Brown, and I get it. He had a terrible year last year. No one was more emblematic of the team's struggles than he was, I think. But I just don't think that people should be so excited to see him go. I mean, listen, I get it. There's going to be more shooting guard talent coming in next year when you talk about 4-star recruit Dante Clark, when you talk about the transfer Adam Smith finally being eligible. I understand that there's going to be a little more depth there, but we were painfully thin this season, and that was really without any major injuries. You know, Marshall Wood was banged up a little bit, but other than that, this was a healthy team for what it was worth. Now we lose Eric Green. Are we really sure that we should be so quick to dismiss whatever depth we can have? And who's to say that Robert Brown couldn't turn it around? You know, James Johnson often said, I'd love to bench the guy, but we don't have anyone else to play. Now, maybe next year, they would have a few other people to play. Why not give him an offseason to turn it around? I'm very sad that Robert Brown is leaving.
Yeah, I think overall, from a depth perspective, it's bad. It's not good for the team to lose a shooting guard, to lose a player at all, because although everyone's excited about the fact that we have 5 recruits coming in, and we have Adam Smith coming in as well from UNCG, finally, like you said, can play, these are true freshmen, and Adam Smith, who will be technically a sophomore. That's a lot of early playing time for a lot of guys, which I think is good. In a way, if Robert Brown didn't want to be here, I think it's better that he's gone so that younger guys can get playing time right away and start getting situated with the college game. But in general, I don't see this as necessarily being a good thing for the Hokies. Another thing to me, just to look at this a little bit bigger picture, Alex, is that people are going to say, you know what? JJ might have the exact same problems that Seth Greenberg did in terms of keeping players here at Virginia Tech. And I think we have to slow down a little bit and let JJ work with his guys, and maybe in this case it's better that someone who doesn't want to be here leaves, because you don't want someone that's going to be a cancer to the locker room staying around. And I'm not saying that Robert Brown was at the end of the season, or would be if he decided to stay, but if a guy doesn't want to be here, then it's going to hurt his production. I think we saw that with a lot of the guys that ended up leaving, including a guy like Ty Garland, who went back closer to home, which is exactly what Robert Brown's doing. And I don't think any of us can really fault a guy for wanting to do that when you get to go home for maybe 2 weeks during the whole entire year. He left during his senior year of high school to play in Virginia as well, so he hasn't been at home essentially for 3 years, and he's a 20-year-old kid. So for me, I think that if he wanted to go, it was better for him just to leave, but I don't think it's a good thing for this program.
Yeah, when you just look objectively, who's going to score the basketball next year for the Hokies? Eric Green is gone. We know that he had so much of the burden on his shoulders. Jarrell Eddy, I guess, is going to emerge as the leading scorer. I have high hopes for C.J. Barksdale. He's definitely showed flashes at the end of last year, but it never really sustained it the way that I had hoped to see. He maybe had, I think, 3 straight games in double figures, and then fell off after that, and just was a non-entity in the ACC tournament. So I am definitely worried about where it's going to come from. You talked about the freshmen. You know, they're highly rated guys. What can they do? Same goes for Adam Smith. Everyone says, oh, it'll be fine. Adam Smith comes in. He scored in bunches at UNCG, but those are the key words at UNCG.
It was over 20 points a game, though. I mean, that production you would think carries over at least a little bit.
I'd certainly like to believe that it will. But, you know, the ACC is a different animal. It's going to be Pitt and Syracuse next year, too. You cannot overrate the fact that we're not going anywhere in this conference for a long time. And not having Robert Brown, a guy who, lest we forget, scored 18 points against Oklahoma State, 21 at West Virginia last season, despite all of his woes, is still a really good player. I get that his outside shot cratered. It went to 23% from the field from 3. That's, you know, not something that you might necessarily think you'd miss, but I think you're right. You know, I think that they will miss it. And while maybe it's better he goes back to Florida, he goes off where he's more comfortable, I think that JJ could have stood to have him around for another year in this program.
Yeah, I think that don't be surprised if this is another guy that we see in a few years and say to ourselves, That one got away, and he's helping another program. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he could have helped ours, but I think that he could still be successful somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe at one Florida Gulf Coast. And speaking of them, Florida Gulf Coast become the only 15 seed to make it to the Sweet 16. Just the darlings in the NCAA tournament at the moment. They beat, good old Georgetown, second seed. They beat San Diego State. Do you think that they've got a real chance of winning it all right now? And who would you say, other than them, has the best chance to win?
Well, obviously, it's going to be tough for me to spout any kind of knowledge on you because my Georgetown pick kind of sucked a lot. And if you looked at my bracket right now, I've got two, actually. They both look just
a little red.
Awful. Just lots of red, actually, to be honest, Alex. But for me, I look at Florida Gulf Coast. Both the games that they won this past weekend, they deserve to win. There's no doubt. They were the better team both times. These aren't fluky games that other lower seeds have won in the past. In my opinion, this is a pretty good team, and they're playing with a lot of confidence right now, and they're fun to watch. I mean, they play every single game like it's an all-star game, and
City.
they don't run the clock out. They like to throw up lobs and dunk it down. I mean, they've had some of the top, I would say, 10 plays in the tournament. You probably could say Florida Gulf Coast has had at least 3 of them, which is pretty incredible through one weekend of play. So, do I really think a 15 seed can run the table and win the NCAA tournament? But at the same time, this doesn't feel like any normal 15 seed. If we're talking about other than them, I still think that, I talked about Louisville last week, I still think that they're in a pretty good position. Unfortunately, the other team that I actually like is Michigan State. I've always been a big Izzo fan. We talked about that last week as well, but they're going to have to face off against each other in the Elite Eight if they were both to win their Sweet 16 matchups. So other than that, I really do think it's pretty wide open. Obviously, we've got some other higher-seeded teams like LaSalle in there as well. So it should be a pretty interesting weekend coming up.
Yeah, as much as I love, FGCU and Dunk City and everything surrounding that, I think that, I've never believed in Georgetown for exactly the reason I said, is that when that offense goes dead, it just goes dead. And when you face a team that's playing with as much confidence as they are, that sort of thing is going to happen. The Hoyas have done it before. While it's certainly still surprising, it didn't shock me that Florida Gulf Coast of all teams was the one to come up with that upset. Next round, it gets really tough. Florida is a team that I personally believe in. So if they knock them out too, they will have taken out our 2 Final Four favorites here on Listen Up, and that'll make me very sad. But I do believe in Florida. I think Florida has the balanced scoring that Georgetown just didn't. Otto Porter had a bad game, and look what happened to them. Florida, on the other hand, a little more balanced. They can be reliant on that outside shooting, but I think that they will, sadly, end Dunk City's run. In terms of the bracket, big picture, I still see Indiana as a team that I like. I know they had a close game against Temple, but watching it, Victor Oladipo, he just sort of took over in those last few minutes. And when you're playing a tough, horrible defensive game like they were against the Owls, that's what you need, a guy that can step up at the last second and hit a 3 like he did at the end of the game. Just about as clutch shot as there was in last weekend's tournament. So I will say that I'm still confident about Indiana, Louisville as well. Sadly not FGC.
I will say this for those who want to go against Florida Gulf Coast is that the 2 teams that they played had flaws. I mean, and every college basketball team has flaws. So it's not as if they were beating necessarily world beaters, even though I did like Georgetown to go far. But in my head, I was going to say Otto Porter was going to have great games throughout the tournament, and he didn't for one game, and that was the difference. All right, let's go to the NBA now. The Heat have won 27 straight games. They play again tonight. Will this streak ever end?
And it sure doesn't seem like it. I mean, Zach Lowe's article on Grantland sort of alludes to it. But this team is just unbelievable to watch on offense right now, without even considering LeBron's individual greatness. Just as a team, they've been that good. Even more than Ray Allen, I think Shane Battier has been the guy that's really kicked things up to the next level for them, particularly on the offensive side of things. Just the way that he can hit the corner 3 while still providing the defense has been transformative for them. And I think that it would be a real upset if they lost in that Chicago game tonight and if they just didn't get the streak, period. They do have a tough schedule. Like we mentioned last week, going to San Antonio
That's gonna be tough.
in a couple days is going to be extraordinarily difficult. But at the same time, I've seen enough to believe in this team.
Certainly.
I certainly don't have any doubts. As much as the Spurs seem threatening, I just think that they're on such a roll right now that 34 seems more inevitable than a possibility at this point.
Yeah, and I think just in general, watching LeBron play without the burden of, can he win the big one, it's just incredible. It is incredible to watch, and I've Not been a huge fan of LeBron since his days with the Cavs, taking out the Wizards in the playoffs. But, I mean, he gets almost a triple-double every single night. And he's just so free and easy right now. It's so incredible to watch this team. I think that in the East, there's no one that can touch them. If they lose more than 2 games in a series in the Eastern Conference part of the playoffs, I will be stunned, to be honest with you. And then when you get to the West, maybe the Spurs and Thunder can compete with them, but I don't think it's crazy to think that this streak can continue for a while and that they can run through the playoffs really easily.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest part that low piece in particular talked about is that it used to be that, they ran a very conventional offense with some unconventional stars. They just ran the pick and roll to try and get James and Wade free. And while that's still something they do, they now use their passing to just run these lightning fast offensive sets that negates, the Tom Thibodeau defense, the Doc Rivers defense that is so focused on stopping the pick and roll. When you take that away, all of a sudden, this is a team with virtually unlimited offensive possibility. And you said it. Who's stopping them in the East? And and who's stopping them on this streak if not San Antonio? New York at home? I certainly don't see that happening. So and then they got to end things. They get number 33 if they can somehow manage to beat Philadelphia. I just don't see how this doesn't happen at this point unless Greg Popovich just puts all of his will into stopping this and being the old miserly grandpa that we all know and hate. So I see the Miami Heat getting to 34.
I agree.
All right, fantastic. All right. We've been avoiding it a little bit because I'm not such a baseball guy, but the season starts on Sunday night, so we have to talk about it. Let's hear your predictions for division winners, wild card winners, and even World Series teams.
All right, let's start out in the National League. We'll start out in the East.
Shocker.
I have the Nationals
Whoa.
winning the NL East.
Oh.
I know, big surprise. But this year it's not a homer pick. And actually, last year I picked them to win the wild card, and they exceeded expectations. But for me, this is the best rotation in baseball. I take it over anyone else, and Strasburg has no
innings
cap this year. So for me, I think that combined with their rotation, then you think about their offense, which in the second half of last year was the best in baseball. When you have Ryan Zimmerman, Adam LaRoche, Ian Desmond, who had a breakout year last year, and then you're talking about Bryce Harper, who you don't even have to think about him for a second and say this offense is great, and then when you put in his potential, he's hitting over 450 in spring training. Over 450. That's incredible. I don't care if it's just spring training. He's been hitting the cover off the ball. So for me, it's an easy pick in the NL East, although I do like the Braves.
Yeah, I like the Braves a lot as well, but, this is your moment. This is where you get to hear me talk well about a Washington sports team for once. So suck it up. I think that they are probably the favorites to win the World Series at this point. Yeah, as hard as that is to believe. You mentioned the staff. Strasburg up at the top, Gio Gonzalez, Jordan Zimmerman, Dan Herron, Ross Detweiler is the 5 starter. Back in the day, he was a pretty good starter for the Pirates. That was like number 2, 3 for us. So we know exactly how good that rotation is, not to mention the lineup. I like the Braves a lot. I think that their staff is really good as well, but there are a few more injury questions. I don't know how well the Upton brothers playing together, as fun of a story as that is, will end up working out. I just think that they're plain old unfortunate to be in the same division as a team as good as the Nationals, because otherwise I think they'd be a division winner pretty much anywhere else.
Yeah, I know, but it's exciting, isn't it? All right, let's talk about the Central. You go ahead.
Well, I think it's got to be the Reds. I like a lot of what they've done, particularly trying to make that the best defensive outfield in the NL, which I do think it is. The pitching staff remains excellent. I'm a little concerned about Bronson Arroyo as the 3rd starter. I'm not sure how that will play out. He's a guy with a very, very high ups and very low downs. So I don't know how that will play out. But, you got to love a guy like Matt Latos up there in the rotation. St. Louis is a little sneaky, sort of lurking behind there. Adam Wainwright and the boys pretty much coming back intact, the same team that we saw last year. It would not surprise me at all to see them out there again. I think that there are a few questions surrounding them, but I definitely say Cincinnati and St. Louis are pretty much neck and neck.
Yeah, last year you did not believe in my Reds. No, they're not my Reds, so I should make that clear. But in terms of offense, it's hard to beat them. I mean, I know I just said that the Nationals had a great offense, but so did the Reds last year. When you think about the middle of the lineup, and it goes Phillips, Votto, Ludwig, Bruce, it's hard to beat, one, the power and just the ability to get on base from those guys. And then if you think about it, if Johnny Cueto can have a Cy Young year, I mean, he started the All-Star game last year for the NL, so their pitching, although it starts to get a little scary towards the middle/end, I think it does enough to get them through and have them win the Central.
Yeah, and Sin Chu Chu. Love that guy.
You do?
Love him so much. I love him leading off at the top of the order.
I think it's good offensively. I'm not in love with his defense, but, we'll see.
Definitely.
We'll see. I still like him.
All right, moving over to the NL West, I think that it will end up being San Francisco repeating. You really cannot beat that pitching staff when Tim Lincecum is essentially an afterthought on this staff. If he comes back to even, 3/4 of his Cy Young self, then, that's your NLCS right there, Nats Giants. So I think that, Marco Scruto, bringing him back, a little questionable, just considering his age, considering how out of the blue his success was last year. So, he certainly could repeat that. I think he will probably regress a little, but at the same time, I don't love what the Dodgers did, adding all that money. It's good in theory, but I just don't know how it'll be in practice. Same goes for the Diamondbacks. I feel like they are very much shifting into win-now mode. I'm just not sure that they will. I think that Justin Upton trade's really going to bite them in a year or two when he starts killing the ball in Atlanta. So I will say San Francisco and stick very much to form for now.
We are agreeing again here. I think that we might change a little bit in the wild card area, but you pretty much said all I wanted to say about the Giants. I'm not a huge believer in the Dodgers yet, but wait, now we're in the wild card section, and I am again. I'm going to go with the Braves and the Dodgers as my two wild card teams. I think that the Cardinals are kind of like a vampire that can't die, but maybe this year is the time when the stake finally hits them and they realize we're not as good as we have been the last few years. I think that if the Dodgers can make it into the playoffs, that is a scary team because it pretty much has everything you would want in a playoff team in terms of front-end starters and offense that just makes your head spin for days, but they have to get there first and they have to figure everything out before they get to the postseason. And obviously I like the Braves again, but I do think that they could be susceptible to losing in a one-game series without that true ace. I think they don't have that.
Absolutely. The thing that worries me the most about the Dodgers probably is the bullpen. Brandon League is your closer. I just don't know how to feel about that. No more Jonathan Broxton. So that worries me a little, but you're right. If Greinke comes back and is all of a sudden his normal self, oh my God, with Kershaw, that's unstoppable. I have just a few reservations about that. I will say that the Cardinals are the vampire that still does not die and get in there with the Braves.
All right, let's go to the AL now. We'll start with the East. There's a lot of question marks there with all of these teams. The Yankees are old. They're decrepit. The Orioles won, I think, 1 million games last year by 1 run, so they're going to tend to regress, I would think, in that. And Boston is kind of rebuilding at the moment. Toronto has a bunch of great guys in theory, but they haven't really won in other places, so why would people think they're going to win in Toronto? So, you know what? I'll go with the Rays.
Yeah, I love the Rays. They get another full year of Desmond Jennings. Probably the best, if not, top 3 best pitching staff up there. I personally am a huge believer in the Rays. I think they made some very savvy moves to improve some, not necessarily weak positions, but Jed Lowry, that's a guy that people don't think about, but he's going to slide in there and be far more offense than they ever had at that position. I just think the Yankees are too banged up. Their stars are too old. Toronto, maybe in a few years, but again, just like the Dodgers, I'm not sure you can just trade and overnight have a baseball team the same way that you can, maybe basketball. So I will stay with the Rays in here. It's no surprise that I love them. Moving over to the West, another team that I've always loved, Texas. I know they lost Josh Hamilton, but I think that they got out on him in the right time. He really tailed off in the second half of last year. He's a guy that's going to miss at least 15 to 20 games every year. I wouldn't want to give him $100 million. I think the Rangers are smart not to. I think Lance Berkman, that's a great signing. I know the guy's 37, but I still think he's got it. And, maybe the A's, maybe the new-look Angels with Josh Hamilton can vault them, but I think that staff is sneaky good. Neftali Feliz, Colby Lewis sort of waiting in the wings, ready to come back. Joakim Soria, too. I'll say Texas. Why not?
I think it's a really tough division, probably the toughest division to call, but I'm going to go with the Angels. I think that although some of those contracts aren't going to look great in a few years, right now, Josh Hamilton and Albert Pujols are still elite hitters in this league, and then you add with them a guy like Mike Trout, who could have honestly been the MVP last year. So I think for me, the West, it's going to be won by the Angels. And then let's finish up real quick with the Central. I think it's really mediocre. There's not a lot to say, and I think that Detroit just ends up kind of winning it by default. but that's just my opinion.
I'm just not in love with their pitching staff. To me, it's a lot of guys who are, ground ball, fly ball, not a lot of strikeout guys aside from Verlander, and that worries me. I am, however, a Chris Sale believer. I think the White Sox, their lineup is certainly a little old, but I believe in it. I think that the White Sox could do it. They only finished 3 games out last year. Give me Chicago.
I like it. I like it. All right, wild cards real quick. I've got Toronto because I do think that they have enough talent to sneak in there. And my other team, I hate to say this, but I just think somehow the Yankees get it done.
Yeah.
I have a hard time betting against them because they always seem to get it done. I can't believe that we're not going to see Rivera in the playoffs one last time.
It certainly wouldn't surprise me. I just think that the AL is so close. I just went with the 2 teams that sort of lost out on default for me, and that's Detroit and Oakland. I think that, the Angels and the Yankees, I could easily see them occupying one of those slots, but I'll just say by default, Tigers and A's.
So snubbing the Angels again. All right,
That's
real quick, World Series picks. I've got Nats over Angels. Everyone's kind of going with those teams, vice versa, whatever. But why not? I'm going
Nats
with
over Rays. I'm ashamed to say.
All right. All right. Let's move on quickly to pick 'em. Michigan State versus Duke. I'm a huge Izzo guy, so I'm going with the Spartans. What about you?
You could never get me to pick Duke for anything. I love Tom Izzo. The Duke always seems to choke when people believe in them. Michigan State all the way. Staying in the tournament, we just talked about it, Florida and Florida Gulf Coast.
Why not? Florida Gulf Coast for the win. I'm feeling it.
I believe in my Gators. They dispatched opponents by 32 and 14 points respectively. They've got that balanced scoring I talked about. Give me Billy Donovan to get back, at least within sniffing the Final Four.
All right, Kansas versus Michigan.
Well, in my brackets, I had Kansas advancing, but then Michigan just obliterated a very well-coached Rams team. Maybe we were wrong to all discount Trey Burke and Tim Hardaway, so you know what? Wolverines.
I've been extremely impressed with Michigan, but I like the fact that Kansas has 4 seniors in the starting lineup, and one of their best players isn't a senior, and we've gotten a lot from McLemore as well. So, you know what? I'll go with Bill Self and the Jayhawks.
All right, moving on to the NBA, another game we talked about, Miami at Chicago. 10 the streak.
Tonight, can they end the streak? I don't think so. I'm not going against the Heat until they lose. I know that's kind of lame, but I just can't find myself doing that
Well,
right
I just talked about it. That Thibodeau defense is kind of neutralized, and that's the one thing they do best. They need the offense to keep up, and with no Rose, they simply don't have it, even if Joakim Noah is a Defensive Player of the Year. Miami.
The Clippers are at San Antonio.
Believe it or not, the Clippers are 2-1 against the Spurs this season, with one of those wins coming on the road. They're on the road again here. I don't think they'll be intimidated. They're 4th in the country with defense. Los Angeles.
I don't really go about betting against the Spurs, so I'm going to go with San Antonio.
All right, fair enough. We're going to spice things up with our quick hits. USA took on Costa Rica last Friday in Denver during a blizzard and somehow won 1-0. Costa Rica is appealing the game, saying that the conditions weren't good enough for football. Is the U.S. victory fair or foul?
I don't know, but Alex said football on camera, so that's good enough for me. But I do think it's cool.
I say Costa Rica, even if you won and made it to World Cup, who cares? You'd lose by 1,000,000 goals. Go away.
All right, despite RG3's knee injury, he successfully threw a pass to a humongous elephant at the circus over the weekend. How cool is this?
Extremely. I love that people have challenged Derrick Rose to do the same thing. He's had longer to recover from the same injury. Let's see it, Derrick.
Fair enough. Go ahead, you say it.
John Wall threw down 47 points on the Grizzlies on Tuesday. Does he deserve a max contract?
He might not deserve it, but you give it to him anyways. Seriously, if you don't lock him up as a Washington fan, you just can't handle it at this point.
If anybody's going to give it to him, it's Ernie. Max contracts are my middle name, Grunfeld, even if he does kind of deserve it.
Buzz Bissinger, best known for writing Friday Night Lights, admits to a shopping addiction, dabbling in gay sex, experimenting as a dominant leather master, whatever that means, and more in GQ. Is this too much information from a guy who's just a writer?
I know honesty may be the best policy, but really, Buzz, a little less honesty from you would probably be all right with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Finally, Dwight Howard says, mark my words, David Lee might have gotten away with an elbow during the Warriors-Lakers game on Monday night, but he'll remember and take care of it later. Should Lee be shaken in his boots?
He'll probably throw his back out during the altercation that may ensue.
I was just going to say, just like the Lakers have taken care of the rest of their division, right? The Warriors are still ahead of them last I checked.
Nice. Good little wordplay there. All right, thanks for watching. Listen up this week.